Hello and welcome to episode 118 of From Impossible to Inevitable. I am your host, Megan Bauer. Thank you so much for joining me today and pushing play on today's episode. So today I have another book recommendation for you. This one I got through super fast because it's not a very big book. I got this book for my birthday. It is Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. And I kind of giggled to myself. This is the expanded edition, which is so small. And so I was like, well, if this is the expanded edition, what was the original? Is it like a pamphlet? I don't know. Anyways, this book was great. It was so good. And I think I'm going to make it required reading for my girls at some point because it really shows you the power that you have over what goes on in your head. And thus, when you can control what goes on in your head, you can control your experience. So here's the whole premise of the book. The whole premise is that emotional suffering is in our thinking. So I love this example that he starts out with. It's actually in chapter 2, but who cares? I love this example because it really highlights this idea. He said, you could be sitting in a coffee shop having an existential crisis, completely stressed out of your mind about how you have no idea what you're doing with your life, while at the same time, the person next to you is happily enjoying their freshly brewed drink and peacefully people watching. You're both in the same coffee shop, smelling the same aromas, surrounded by the same strangers, but how the world looks to each of you couldn't be more different. So he says, reality is what is happening right now. It is the objective circumstance that is occurring without any meaning or judgment attached to it. And so what we experience is not reality itself, but our perception of reality. Any meaning or thinking we give to something is self-created and our choice. So of course, it's the thinking that is changing what our experience of the reality is. The person having the existential crisis is so in their head, in their thinking and, thought spiraling and judging and storytelling and all of that. And the person next to them is totally just in the moment, chill, zen, just enjoying that moment of their day. And they're both having such a different experience because of what is going on in their head. It's not the events that happen in our lives, but our interpretation of them that causes us to feel good or bad. So then when we grasp onto that it's our interpretation, we see our power there. We see that, okay, I've got some control here. I've got some ability here. Now, I'm not going to run through this whole book. It was really excellent. I feel like some of it, you need the context in more than I can give you on the podcast for some of it to really make sense. Because on the podcast, I just pull out these nuggets that are so good, and I try to expand on them and unpack them for you. But the thing is that there's so much more value in the book, as little as it is, that really it's a valuable read. I highly recommend it, especially if you find yourself in these positions where you are emotionally suffering, where you are feeling like you've got the thought spirals, the anxiety. Truly, this has the negative side of anxiety spirals and panic attacks and thought loops, like negative thought loops. That has so been my reality. I have so lived that. I have so dealt with that. And it is so painful. It sucks so much because the pain, all of the suffering is in your head and you're with yourself all the time. So you don't get to escape it. There's no release until you realize that you can just change your thinking. He actually really promotes this idea of non-thinking, which I think is such an interesting idea and something that truly requires practice. Okay, so back to the book. He says, when you change your thinking, you change your experience of life without needing to change the event that happened. Without our own thinking about an event, we can find peace because we are experiencing exactly what reality is without our own judgments, stories, or expectations. And this is that idea of non-thinking. So we're just We're just here. We're just experiencing the moment, sitting in the coffee shop. We're just experiencing the things that we see, the things that we smell, the things that we're touching. We're just experiencing all of that. We're not putting any judgment on what that moment should look like, what stories are going on of, oh, I shouldn't just be sitting here because I really have this, and this to do, or whatever, or I can't believe I just paid $4 for a coffee, or putting all of this judgment or stories or whatever on that moment. You're just present. You're just enjoying that moment. So you can change your thinking. You can do the non-thinking thing, which I think is great. Just change your thinking. You can also be like, yeah, I paid for this coffee. I'm enjoying it immensely. And this just feels like an extravagant moment to just be able to hear and to just breathe this in, breathe in the environment. Just, right? That's probably where I would tend to lean towards rather than non-thinking, because I don't know, to just, I've got this constant narrative going on, okay? It comes out in the podcast. Okay. So, you change your thinking, you get to exchange, you get to change. So, he's not like this positive thinking sort of person. Like, you find it that really hard, like, to think positively. Oh, this positive thinking culture, blah, blah, whatever. I don't care. He talks about non-thinking, because when you are not thinking, when you're not putting judgment on things, when you're not telling stories, when you're really just in that moment, your natural of being is joy, love, peace. That is your natural. So take out the thinking, when you take out the storytelling, the judgment, the whatever, your natural state, you just fall into this natural state of joy, love, and peace. So he says, the truth is that you do not have to have thoughts to think or feel positive emotions, because you can just tap into those by like unsubscribing from the crazy. You can just tap into those by not thinking, by removing all the judgment and the storytelling and the blah, 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 blah that goes on. The goal is to decrease the amount of time for it takes us to regulate our emotions and return to a state of peace when something stressful. So that's the goal. Take the time, or increase that amount of time to realize that, okay, I'm thinking about this event, this stressful thing, this negative thing, and go from not thinking about it, or I want to go from thinking about it to not thinking about it. However, and he gives you strategies and everything like that, and like practices and things. It is a journey. This is definitely a practice. And obviously, the more you do it, the better you will get at it. But that is the goal, right? You feel whatever negative thing, and then to, okay, well, I can change my interpretation of this thing. I can just choose to not moment. Sounds easier than it is, maybe? Question mark. I'm the person, and this will fall into our, I'm the person. I tend towards, okay, this thing just happened. It triggered me. I am now in a state of anxiety. I'm now in a state of doubt. I'm now in a state of fear. Whatever it is, how can I see this differently? I change my perspective. How can I choose this moment differently? Maybe it is just tapping into the reality of like, okay, well, this moment, I'm sitting in a coffee shop. Nothing dramatic is actually happening. And I can just simply focus on the senses, focus on the moment, and detach myself from the thinking that's going on in my head. How thinking, as we're careful not to say, I don't want to go down into that spiral, because you really need the context in order to understand his distinction between thinking and thoughts. But he so he talks about getting back to this state, right? You are detaching from your thinking, you're changing your perspective, you're changing what's going on in your mind to experience. So He says, judgment closes the mind while questions open it. Continually asking questions that challenge our current thinking is one of the best ways to create space in our minds. I'm the questioner, right? Like I am is there a better way to see this? Is there a more true way to see this? Is this bad about this? Does everyone feel bad about this? Does this happen to people? They are excited. Does this happen to people and they, just go on with their day? Like, is this, whatever the question, I just question the crap out of it until I begin to see something, until I feel differently. And like I've mentioned before, gratitude is my go-to. It's very easy for me to grasp onto. So I'll experience something like, what about this can I feel grateful for? Like, am I really grateful for, that this happened because of this? So I was recently really sick and I was very frustrated because I had just been sick and I really get sick that often. It's not something that happens to me very often. I really don't. And so to be really sick 3 weeks after I was really sick, it was really frustrating. And I was like, why am I so sick? And it wasn't until I could back up, calm down, and be like, why am I grateful that this happened? What can I be grateful about? Well, I can be grateful for the naps. I can be grateful for reason to just kind of hang out in bed. I can be grateful for the touche. I can be grateful for chance to go down and read and journal and just chill out. I can be grateful for that. Sure that I was congested and coughing and blah, blah, blah. And choosing to tap and changed the experience. And honestly, you could ask Jake or the girls because once I did to tap into the gratitude, I was less irritable. I was less, I was like, okay, great, great. We're doing better. Even if I'm not physically feeling better, we're doing better. And that's the goal, right? That's the goal. So I loved this book. Don't Believe Everything by Joseph Nguyen. Why Your Thinking is the Beginning and End of Your Suffering. Because you get to choose what goes on in your mind. You get to choose what goes on in your brain, and you get to choose how you see things. You get to choose the job that you in your life. You get to choose the stories you tell. You get to choose those things. And that is so powerful. So powerful. When you get to choose how you see, change what your experience is. And you choose what your experience is, even, right? Because I can be grumpy and frustrated in bed. I can be